Welcome everyone to this another episode of Unlearning the Falsehoods. So far, we have discussed a lot of things, and all these things must be taken in a proper context, not individually, because these are historical events. And any novice student of history would know that there are also simultaneously other things going on as well, and all the simultaneous and parallel events that are occurring might or might not have any bearing on the event that we focus upon. Okay, I will quote a similar example from our history in the further part of this video to display this, because history must never be understood individually, meaning there were other events occurring all across the world that was affecting what you guys are like, what we guys are speaking about. All right. So in the previous video, we ended the video at the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. That was what it was, a demonstration of the barbaric tendencies of the colonizer, that was the British. All right. All this while, we were taught that they were an enlightened civilization. They had superior morality compared to the pagan natives. Okay. It would be surprising to know that. They are the ones who consider us as Satan worshippers, devil worshippers. For them, idols are Satans. All right. So a monotheistic colonizer who claims to worship God, okay, was doing barbaric activities on the people who he thought was worshipping Satan. Okay. All right, but let's not get into, because there will be events in past, and people would say that these are the events of past, and you cannot, you can only analyze the events in the hindsight and in retrospect, but you cannot criticize them, because what actually might have been the ground situation, there is no mode for us to acquaint ourselves with the situation of the past. What were the exact ground realities? Okay, so yeah, Jallianwala Bagh massacre happened. A general who goes by the name of Dyer showed up with troops armed with machine guns and automatic rifles, opened fire on unarmed civilians, women, and children, and killed them. Okay. Now, the events that happened after this, that are real eye openers for what exactly does it mean when I say that the British colonizer had this sense of religious supremacism, meaning that since I come from an enlightened religion, I am somewhat racially superior than the pagan natives of Bharat. Okay, this was the underlying idea of the colonizer, having this sense of entitlement and superiority. Okay, if you go and look it up on the internet, you will come across many picture evidences where you will see how exactly the pagan natives were treated. Okay, there are many pictures on social media platforms, more particularly X. If you want to look at images, you can go on the social media platform that is X and find out how exactly were the pagan natives treated by the officers and the authorities who worked for the company, and then in the future for the government. How did they treat their servants? We are going to get a glimpse of it in the further parts of this video. So yes, uh, so Jallianwala Bagh happened. Okay. After that, there was a curfew in place, meaning nobody was allowed to go out on the streets, and this curfew remained in force for days, meaning for days and weeks at a stretch, people were not allowed to go out of their homes. Okay. Now, basic human necessities such as water, medicines, and whatnot, all these things you cannot predict when you will need them. Okay. So, even during the curfew, you'll have to allow civilians to go outside and buy things such as water, medicines, and whatnot. Okay. So, after the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, there was a martial law in place. You were not allowed to publish any material, so the information does not spread to other parts of Bharat, because that would trigger some revolutionary sentiments, because they themselves knew deep inside them that what they had done was not really right. what General Dyer had done was not really right. Okay, so they gagged the press. There was a martial law in place. Nobody was allowed to go out. Nobody was allowed to come in. You were not allowed to publish any material, written or otherwise. So it took some time for the rest of Bharat to, get the knowledge of what exactly had happened in Amritsar in Jallianwala Bagh. All right. So why exactly did they make this? If indeed they were sure what they had done was right, why not let others know? Okay, this is the first tell of a liar. This is the first tell of a manipulator. All right. If indeed deep down you believe what you did was right, okay, let others know what you did. What was the purpose of hiding it? This makes you want to think that if indeed they were hiding information, okay, they were afraid that it might trigger revolutionary fervor again, and Punjab, like we have discussed in previous videos, was a fertile bedrock of revolutionary spirit. Okay, and I don't say that in a demeaning way. Punjab has given birth to some sons of soil. To this very day we are proud of them. Okay, so yes. Right after the Jallianwala Bagh that happened in 1919, there was a martial law in place. There was also something called as a crawling order. Okay, meaning the localites or the natives of Amritsar, they were asked to crawl on the road. Okay, so there was one incident that happened. It was alleged that one particular English lady was harassed, okay, by some of the natives of Punjab. Okay, this is an isolated incident. So that happened. So this was something that infuriated Dyer, and a crawling order was in place. Okay, the natives were asked to crawl whenever they would pass through the very exact spot, to the very exact spot where that particular lady was alleged to have been molested. All right. There are other examples of what was expected out of the native. They were made to touch their feet. They were made to they were expected to touch their heads on the ground. Okay, the British, they understood, like, our way of worshipping the god was that we bow down our heads to the ground in front of the idol. Since they were here and they considered themselves racially and religiously superior, they thought and they assumed and they thought that they were entitled to similar worship. Hence, there was also other orders passed that whenever there is a native comes across as a superior British authority, he'll have to bow down his head on the floor in front of that authority. These are actual laws that were passed, and the natives were expected to comply. Okay, whenever they did not comply, some coercive and forceful methods were used to make them comply. Okay, this is somebody who claims to be from the enlightened civilization. This is making people do the rest. All right. One thing so far you might have pretty much understood about the race of Bharat is we people really worship the truth. We people really worship real knowledge, something that is actually worth knowing. Okay, so if you have knowledge, you will be considered a god over here. But the very fact that you had to use coercive and forceful methods, to make us obey those laws speaks volumes about the veracity of your claims of being enlightened civilization. Something for the others to think about, ponder, and appeal to your reason. Okay. Yes, so when this happened, and after the martial law was lifted and the information spread across all the other territories of Bharat, people became aware. Okay, there is one particular incident that is very much glorified in our history textbooks as Ravindranath Tagore. Okay, although I'm not taking away anything from his achievements, I'm simply just quoting that he was the one who returned his knighthood. Knighthood is all you see all these Britishers who use the prefix of the name Sir. Okay, they're really fond of these extravagant prefixes in front of their names to make them sound like somebody who is nobility and whatnot. So the Lord and Sir and all these prefix that you see before their names to make them sound like nobility and elite. So they do that. So they have this tradition of presenting people with knighthood. Okay, and similar knighthood was presented to Rabindranath Tagore. I don't really see how or why exactly did he accept it in the first place, because accepting an accolade from your master would would inevitably, not inevitably, would mean that you are accepting that you are subservient to them. So yes, Tagore, he accepted knighthood, and that in very itself speaks about what effect did it have on the minds of the natives of Bharat about the racial superiority of the British. Okay, so yes, all these things were done. There were people who gave up their jobs. There were widespread movements, and what it did was, at least it started discussion back home in the Westminster Parliament. But there was something, now what I'm about to say is, okay, this was conveniently brushed away from our history textbooks, because they'll only tell you what happened in Jallianwala Bagh. Okay, but what happened after it is conveniently ignored from our history textbooks, because it really displays the disgraceful and double faced nature of the British. Okay, it really speaks volumes about their character, what happened afterwards. Okay, indeed, the Brits, they might seem as outward as brave, but deep inside, they were cowards, and they were hiding their deep seated insecurities about, they deep down they knew their race was not superior to ours. Hence, they had to resort to such measures. All right. So, what happened after the Jallianwala Bagh was, just like everything else that happens in a democracy. Whenever something bad happens, okay, you set up a commission, you set up a committee to look into it. So there was a Hunter committee that was set up to look into the matters of the Jallianwala Bagh. Okay, what the British did conveniently was they passed an indemnity bill, meaning after setting up a commission, simultaneously they passed a bill. That is, whatever the soldiers did, okay, whatever the soldiers did in capacity of discharging their official duty, you cannot prosecute them. They were simply just following the orders. Same goes for General Dyer. Okay, so that makes you want to think. Okay, General Dyer, who was a superior, okay, and the soldiers or the officers under his command, they were simply just following his orders. So you cannot prosecute, even after you find incriminating evidence against them, you still cannot prosecute them. So why was the need to pass the indemnity bill? Okay, keep in mind, in the previous episode we have spoken about how Mohandas Gandhi, he had faith. Okay, he had the faith in the principles of justice and liberty of the British. He was under the opinion that if we stay obedient, the British would behave fairly. Okay, so how do you reconcile the sentiments of Gandhi with the ideas and the actions of the British themselves? If indeed they were fair, if indeed they were a superior race, if indeed they were fair, why did they pass these bills? Okay. I'm not saying that the British are at fault over here. They were doing what they could to save their ass, save their butt, forgive my language. Okay. Why exactly were the moderates buying into this theory of British benevolence or British justice? They were doing what they should have done in that condition. Why exactly were the moderates behaving the way they were behaving? This really makes you want to think, was really the theory of safety valve true? Were the moderates operating as undercover agents of the British to regulate and curate the sentiments of freedom and struggle that were coming up organically inside the natives? This is something that you should think about, not blindly trust the history, what the history textbooks tell you. Okay, so yes, there was an indemnity bill. So even though if the community, even though the Hunter Committee that was organized to look into the events that happened on Jallianwala Bagh on that day in Jallianwala Bagh. Even if they find soldiers, even if they find them guilty, nothing could have been done, and nothing was done. Okay, nothing was done. In fact, on the contrary, back home in the Westminster Parliament, he was lauded as somebody who is, he was afforded a hero's welcome. Okay, he was asked to leave active service and go back home. So when he went back home, he was afforded a hero's welcome inside the Westminster Parliament. There are debates, there's a website about this where something that goes by the name of Westminster Archives, something of that sort. Those PDFs are available on the internet. You can look it up. So he was given a hero's welcome, somebody who has accomplished something in the land of the pagans and has come back. Okay, he received a pompous, welcome from the British. Why would they do so? Weren't they conscious stricken? Weren't they an enlightened race with superior model of morality? No. Deep down within, they were simply just supremacists, racial supremacists who believed that their race was better than the pagan natives of Bharat. But our history textbooks won't talk about this. Makes you wonder why. To this very day, there are many of the authors who have spoken about this. There are many politicians, not just from our country, from the countries who were previously colonies of British. They have spoken about this, the racial superiority and the condescension that follows it. Okay, it's out there on the internet. That is why I keep telling you, be politically active. When you become politically active, you'll understand where exactly the world is going, how are things functioning. Okay, so far you have not taken active interest. I urge you to take an active interest in the polity of your country. All right. So yes. So the committee, as usually, absolved General Dyer and all his soldiers of any of the duty, any of the excesses that they might have committed while the discharge of their duty. And in fact, they were lauded. Okay, in the British Parliament, it was said the General Dyer ably handled the situation in Punjab, and he was successful in instilling a sense of terror amongst the natives of Punjab. Keep in mind, we have discussed this in our previous videos. How exactly was Punjab a challenge for the British because of seething sedition and revolutionary spirit on that land? Okay, this is something that you should think about. Okay, simply just don't blindly believe that Jallianwala Bagh happened and go into this, pity party that, oh, this thing happened to us. Look at what happened after it. The British what exactly were they doing by such actions? They were covering up their actions. Who covers up their tracks? Who covers up their actions? Somebody who is guilty. Okay. All right, but moving ahead, let's not, wallow too much into the self-pity, because it's never going to happen. The British are never going to acknowledge what they did in Amritsar in 1919, and to hell with them. Okay, we are not going to keep waiting for a day when they will acknowledge what they did was wrong. We know what they did was wrong. We don't need you to say it, to satiate our whatever. All right. So yeah, what happened was happened. Don't forget and don't even forgive. You just move on. Next up, like I said, the Government of India Act of 1919 was going to come up. We have discussed this in our previous videos. Why was it important? The Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, they were important because it brings about this idea of constitutional framework that we follow to this very day. The state government and the, a central government overseeing those state governments. This model or this framework, this structure was envisaged by the Government of India Act of 1919, and to this very day we follow it with obviously some modifications, not enough modifications, but we follow it. Much to the detriment of the sentiments of this civilization. It clearly favors the monotheistic people or the traditions of monotheism. but nobody cares to think about it. All right. Yeah. Next up was, now what was happening was, since you know if Congress movement, okay, if the political party that is Congress and the movement that they were, supposedly favoring, if indeed that was organic, why exactly was it that there were fragments and fissures inside the Congress itself? Okay, there were people, there were moderates who would willingly accept anything that the colonial master would offer as a concession, whereas there were people who were labeled as extremists, but in true sense they were nationalists, people who advocated for complete and utter sovereignty. They were labeled as extremists, and they disagreed with the moderates on almost every issue. Okay, but what happened after 1919 approached was, the laws were getting stricter. British was using more and more weapons and violence to, you know dampen the spirit of nationalism and try to frame people what exactly was going on, as we saw with the example of Tilak. While Tilak was in jail, there were modifications made to section IPC section 124A, just to make sure that they could nail Tilak permanently inside the jail. Okay, so yeah, this again speaks volumes about the character of the British. Okay, so while somebody was in jail, you change the law so to make sure that that person, stays in jail permanently. So this was what was happening. The state had taken a vindictive stance. Okay, the government that was being run from the Westminster had taken a vindictive stance, meaning if you get into the crosshairs of the government, they will prosecute you to the hilt. They'll not spare you. They'll take away all your resources and everything there is and put you in jail for indefinite time. So, to a certain degree, this definitely instilled some fear into the natives. So, now what had become was these labels of moderates and extremists, okay, they were very elastic. On certain issues, you will find the moderates and extremists would have coinciding points of views. On some issues, they will be different. On some issues, some of the nationalists would support the moderates, and on some issues you will find moderates supporting the nationalists. So it had now become very loose and elastic, the camps. Okay, there will be defections from both the camps on different issues. Why? Just so to avoid this vindictive stance and the vendetta against them by the government, because they had clearly realized that now we cannot keep fooling the mass of the population. Keep in mind, this is in the 1920s. Okay, now in the 1920s, the knowledge had spread, the elite circle had widened. We have discussed this in our previous videos. People who had the leisure and the time and the resources to be politically active, to participate in political activities, were far less in the initial part of the 1900s. But now you were in the 1920s. Okay, there was one more decade that had passed, and there were people, okay, who were coming up. We have spoken about Gandhi so far. There is still Sardar Patel to enter the arena. There is still Motilal Nehru and his son JL Nehru, who will show up in the further episodes. But yes, people were now becoming politically conscious. Alright, so what it did was, now there were the lines of distinction had blurred between the extremists, moderates, nationalists, and whatnot. Okay, what this warrants is, what really you need to focus upon right now over here is, okay, the Khilafat movement. This was a political opportunity that Gandhi grabbed it with both the hands, but you need to understand some background work that went into the Khilafat movement. Okay, this will take a while, but I'll unpack this idea as lucidly as I can. Okay, now there are two domains. On which Islam focuses. One of them is, they call this as two caliphates. Okay, there are two caliphates under which a Muslim person exists. Number one is the outward caliphate, and number two is the inward caliphate. Meaning there is something such as an outward life that a Muslim has, and an inward life that a Muslim has. Now, inward life is spiritual, outward life is guided by the state, meaning the government. Okay, now both these things have to be controlled by the principles that have been laid down in their scriptures, that is the outside world and the inside world. All right, now for the outside world, what did they have? Government. Okay, now we have previously discussed that for it is not allowed in their faith that a non-Muslim cannot claim to justly rule over the Muslims. Okay, so their outward kingdom depends on their ability to control the political power, that is the government. Hence you will see that wherever they are not in a majority, they will constantly revolt. Okay, because their outward caliphate, their outward life cannot be dictated by somebody who is a non-Muslim. Okay, now let's come to the inward life, meaning their spiritual life. Their spiritual life is largely controlled by the ulama. All right, so this was the background. Now let's come to the Khilafat movement. Khilafat movement, what happened was, why exactly were, okay, we have discussed this again in the previous video, that there was this mutual alliance of benefit between the Christians and the Muslims. Why? Because both of them were the people of the book. Okay, now what was something that was binding them? Okay, you'll see that even in the current era, you will see that in many of the countries they are still fighting. So this is not a valid argument for us to make that since they were people of the book and hence they were binded by this alliance of mutual benefit. Okay, there was something called Crimean War that happened in 1854 and 1856. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, history cannot you cannot study, at least you cannot study the history of Bharat in the 18th and 19th century on a like unilaterally or on a single path. Okay, you'll have to consider what was happening all across the world, because by the virtue of us being a British colony, we were, our political outlook was, kind of merged with the British outlook. Whatever they were doing in the outside world, okay, it was also us who was doing, by us being the virtue of us being their colony. Okay, now like I said, there was no public opinion. They did not have the concurrence of public opinion, but since they were the colonial masters, it was assumed that we agreed with them. All right. So during the Crimean War, France, UK and the Ottoman Empire, they formed a mutual alliance to defeat Russia. Now this Crimean War was undertaken in 1854 and 1856. Okay, so the British were fighting in arms with the Ottoman Empire. Okay, what did the Ottoman Empire signify? The Caliphate of Islam. So they formed this mutual alliance from 1850s onwards by fighting in arms with the Ottoman Empire, that is the British. Okay, now since they had drawn some proximity, okay, I guess they had the support of the Ottoman caliphs after 1857 to legitimize their claim as the masters of Bharat. Okay, now we can sit and discuss that whom did the British replace when they came over here as the kings of Bharat. There is considerable argument to be made that they replaced Marathas. Okay, but that is besides the point. Whom did they consult? That is what matters. After the Crimean War, what did they do? They consulted the Ottoman caliphs back in the Turkey to legitimize their claim over Bharat. Okay, so this bolstered the courage of the Muslims. Okay, since they were the ones who were seeking our approval to legitimize their claim, okay, now we need to form an alliance of mutual benefit. And hence from 57 onwards, you'll see there is an increased bonding between both the people of the book. Okay. Now, like I said again, I would urge you to do your own due diligence. I'm simply just opening up some doors and appealing to your reason. There are much more things that were going on parallelly. If you want to go into the minutest of the details, sift through some of the other resources, some other sources of history as well. Okay. But this was a primer. Okay. This was the reason why they believed that the Muslims and the Christians were the allies. Okay. So yes, this was the reason why they believed that. And whence, let's come back to the 1919 and 1920s. What happened was, now British switched sides. Okay, in the 1850s they were fighting with the Ottoman Empire against the Russians, but in the 1900s they were fighting against the Ottomans. They were fighting against the Ottomans with the help of the Christian countries, and they had defeated them. Okay, so in a period of less than 1 century, a little less than 1 century, the British had managed to change their alliance. Okay, this was the reason why there was this doubt and why the Muslim League and Muslims, they were miffed with the British. Okay, now this led to them seeking some alliance with the pagan natives for the first time. Okay, it is very much even widely discussed in the Westminster as to how do we drive away the Muslims from the pagan natives of Bharat, because the British themselves saw that there is a potential of unity between them, because they were united by this cause of Khilafat. And when I say united, okay, the contributing factor from the pagan side was moderates. Okay, it's not that the entire country and all the pagans of Bharat were united in supporting the Khilafat. No. Okay, whenever you speak about Congress, you do not make this grave mistake of assuming that Congress was acting on behalf of all the natives of Bharat. Okay, it was simply just a political party of elites. To this very day, it is. But yeah, it was a word of caution. So this was what drove away. This was what was. This is the factor that was influencing British to grant more and more concessions to the Muslims to keep them away from the pagan natives. Okay, because they wanted to prolong their rule as well. Okay, so there were a lot of political dynamics going on in our freedom struggle. So stakeholders who were involved in this process of freedom struggle were indeed political parties, and they were fighting for political gains. Okay, they were not fighting for independence. All right, that's it for this video. I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching.